What you do with the filter to get it ready is you dip your finger in that new oil and wet down both of the gaskets on either side with oil. That'll help it slide onto the mandrel. Then you take the mandrel and you put it down over the mandrel. Just sort of gently wiggle it down. Now be careful, hold the heel of your hand against the nut. This bolt here is actually the tail end of the mandrel. You want to put your hand against that because the way the mandrel seals against the oil filter cover is another O-ring. And if you let those two parts disassemble, you're going to have to clean off that junction too before you reassemble it. You typically don't need to replace that O-ring. It's only if you see the oil seeping and dirt collecting before the oil change that you'd ever think of doing that. Once again, that's a job for your local motorcycle dealership to find you the right O-ring. So you put your heel against that so the mandrel doesn't push out of the oil filter cover. And as soon as you've got thread exposed on the other side, because you pushed the filter down enough, then this assembly is ready to go. And now I'm going to bring the oil filter thing into the picture, which I've already cleaned. And it goes up into here, and you feel for those threads. Might as well spin the whole thing, at least for this one, which is completely circular. Some of them are keyed, or they're oblong, or they fit between the pipes. So some filter bodies can't be screwed on quite like this to spin around and around. You'll have to actually spin the mandrel in the cover and hold the cover still depending on the way it sits on the bike. But this one, it works out okay. Now I take my wrench again that I used to loosen it, and I tighten it down finally. Best to use the box end for the final tightening if you can. There should be a torque spec for that too. All done here. It really is good in motorcycle repair to have people around to help you out. You have to get awfully clever with jacks and jack stands and boxes and blocks of wood if you're working alone. But it's always handy to know how. There is a torque specification on the drain plug, and if you're not sure, you should look it up in the manual and use a torque wrench. It feels like Mel's tightening it enough. She's moving the whole bike.
Okay.
All right. The messy part's done. But now comes time for filling it up with oil. When you pour oil, just to let you know, the oil pours out of the spout and then recurves a little bit down the spout before it comes off. So it actually pours to behind where the spout's over until the bottle's emptier and it gets to flowing and it will pour straight out. So it's kind of a fiddly thing. Mel's going to pour right now.
I'm about to start.
Dispose of your oil containers carefully. Oil containers carefully.
Oh yeah, here's a good little detail. We have that fancy drain pan. Actually holds about 2 motorcycle oil changes worth of oil in it, maybe 3, which you can seal up with these caps, seal up all the holes, and you can actually take it to your local auto parts place or auto mechanic, at least around here in the Twin Cities. They will take your used motor oil, you can pour it into a big container, and it will then be picked up and recycled. What motor oil is used for when it's used, it's a pretty good fuel oil, and people who still run steam trains for like tourists and stuff, their preferred fuel these days instead of coal is used motor oil because it's cheap and it's around, and it's a lot more efficient weight-wise than coal ever was. So it actually does get reused and recycled pretty well. if you can bring it to the right place. And boy, does it ever make a mess. If you try to dump it down the sink or down the gutter or on your lawn, that's just bad. It's carcinogenic, it kills everything, and it's much better to take it to your auto parts store and put it in the tank.
Put my dipstick all the way in, bring it all the way out, and that looks like it. But let's double check.
One more time?
Yeah.
Yeah, every bike has slightly different standards. Almost all of them tell you to measure it hot.
No, it's not.
Almost all of them tell you to measure the oil level hot. But as Mel said, her manual says the specification for the oil level with the bike on its side stand, whereas all of mine want the bike level. More?
It's so clean, it's hard to tell.
Well, one way you can tell is like if you wipe it off really good, those little crosshatch marks are really sharp.
They're wet.
And if they're wet, then you've got oil on them.
So it's good to go.
Okay, next thing you do is you start your bike and you run it for a little bit, like 20 or 30 seconds, to make sure the oil's everywhere that it wants to be. And then you recheck the oil one more time. Man, that sounds good. Boy, it's quiet, it's even. This bike's in good shape. Okay, that ought to be long enough to get the oil spread around.
Okay.
And now we just got to wait about the same amount of time for the oil to all fall back down into the pan. And then we'll know that the engine's got enough oil and she can recheck the dipstick to make sure it doesn't need more.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Still okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Mel's all done. I always have a notebook which I write everything I do to my bike in it, so that if it's a regular maintenance item, like oil, I'll know when I last did it and when I need to do it again. I might even stick a sticky note someplace on the bike to tell me what the mileage will be at that time. Another thing that kind of book is good for is for irregular maintenance. You can look back to what you had just done if your motorcycle starts giving you trouble. And unfortunately, the most likely reason a motorcycle has trouble is because you just screwed something up when you fixed something else. And you can look through what you did and get an idea where to start. And another one is like for other irregular or extremely long maintenance, you'll forget 2 years ago, you know, that was the last time you cleaned your battery terminals or whatever. But if you start to have trouble with your electrics, you can look back, oh boy, look, the last time I got into my connections was, you know, 1994. I'll bet it needs it again. It really helps you troubleshoot as you own the bike for longer and longer. So that's my recommendation. I didn't even ask Mel if she keeps a notebook like that or not, but she
No,
did.
but I can tell you from experience that Hondas are really good at running without oil. And one clear sign that the bike needs oil is when it starts shaking.
Do not try this at home, guys. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show and showing us your bike and how to work with it. In this episode, we've seen how and why to change your oil and filter. As a final note, we should address how often to do it. Typically, the smaller the engine, the shorter the oil change interval. This is because it works harder than a big engine would, and the oil gets hotter and gets dirty faster. Having only a filter screen makes this even more important to keep the interval short. The older the design of the engine, the dirtier the combustion is, and the worse the fit between the parts. This also shortens the oil change interval. Engines with more oil in them take longer to wear it out. My Concourse takes around 4 quarts, like a car. My XS400 Yamaha takes only 2 quarts. Here's your rules of thumb from a couple bikes that I've been involved in maintaining. A 1984 Honda Rebel 250. It has a small oil sump, maybe 1.5 liters, no oil filter, and it has to work really hard on the highway. In town for a light rider, maybe every 2,000 miles. Touring within the state now and then, 1,500 miles. Loaded at 70 miles an hour, blasting straight from Minneapolis to LA, probably change it every 1,000 miles. For a 1977 Yamaha XS400, it has a medium oil sump, about 2 liters, and an older engine design, so it has to work hard on the highway over 65 and the parts rattle around a little more. And it burns oil, about 1 quart per 1,000 miles or so no synthetic for that bike. In town or touring at 65 miles an hour or less, I'd do it every 2,000 miles. If I was loaded and going 70 miles an hour all day, straight from Minneapolis to LA, I'd probably shorten that to 1,500 miles. My 1995 KLR 650 Kawasaki has, once again, a medium oil sump, about 2 liters, a high mileage engine, a very old engine in miles that dirties the oil really fast. It easily goes 75, but it burns 1 quart of oil every 1,000 miles, so it doesn't get synthetic either. In town or touring at 75 all day, I'd just give that a 2,000 mile oil change interval. A 1997 Kawasaki ZG1000 Concourse. It has a large oil sump, 4 quarts or 4 liters, something close to that. It has a tight, powerful motor. It easily goes 90 miles an hour loaded, and it doesn't burn any oil. So you can use synthetic on that bike. For all types of street riding and normal oil, I'd probably change it every 3,000 miles. For all types of street riding with synthetic oil, I change it every 5,000 miles. All right.